together with Mim. Okay.
Welcome! We are now live on YouTube, everybody. I would like to ask everyone to mute for a second. And I want to say we are now recording live. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes? Okay, awesome. We are now recording. We're streaming live to YouTube, so YouTube can see us. Hello, YouTube. We are also going to be taking some screenshots, and I would like to remind everyone that you can record and screenshot only apart from, what was it, backstage and breakout rooms. Please keep that a safe space with no recording. Thank you very much. And welcome, everybody. We said that. And please remember, we love failing forward because there's no other way. And please also remember to be kind, be empathetic, and be nice to each other because this is a safe space for everyone. Union.
Yay! Applause from Mim, who is sitting next to me. We have been cutting slides because we want to start this year in a different way. We got a lot of feedback from you last year, and we made a few changes. So one of them is we are going to do one jam per month. We're going to see each other this year once a month, meaning that we have also created an inner circle. So where is this inner circle? It's on good old WhatsApp. Now, how to get there? That's not easy. You will see a link in the chat, but it comes and it goes. So, you must be quick to catch it. And then you can enter our lovely WhatsApp group, What's in the Village. So what do we do in that WhatsApp group? We will exchange more about you. We want to know more about each other. That's what you have told us. And as an example, I have here the preparations you do for the Chinese New Year. Now, how do I get this? So this was given to us in the WhatsApp channel by the personal feng shui master of Horia. If you don't know feng shui, check it out on the internet. And now it is time to introduce to you Josephine. Josephine is a design strategist, and I didn't know so well what that is, but Josephine will tell us about it. And very welcome to be with us. This is a very friendly, intimate, personal community. We love to learn from you, Josephine. And I also love the expression that you said. Sometimes people say, what? Inclusive design again? And I thought, yes, please, again. The floor is yours, Josephine.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So let me share my screen. Hello, everybody. Super exciting to be here today and see you all. And let me make sure that I see all your faces. So yes. Okay, so let me put it in presenter mode. So yes, inclusive design. That's what we're going to talk about today, right? So as Yen indeed said, sometimes inclusive design is a very hot topic. So sometimes people say, oh, not again a talk on inclusive design. But I was very excited that Yen actually wanted to share it or gave me the opportunity to share it with all of you, because to me, I'm very passionate about this topic. I think we can never have enough about this topic because there's still a lot always to improve. So yeah, I'll be talking about that today. This is a visually used for a Microsoft Design Toolkit, but I'll first also give just a general introduction about me and about inclusive design, and then we'll dive into the toolkit. So yeah, this is me when I started at Microsoft in 2019. So I came straight out of university. I studied in Delft. I studied industrial product design, and then I did a master's in strategic design, which is also where I got the title design strategist or strategic designer from. I think there are a lot of titles in this area. But yeah, so that's a bit where my background comes from. Today, I'm a creative product manager. So basically, that means that I'm managing a process, but mostly from a design point of view. So I'm managing the designers and the creative roles, but not so much the technical roles. Because within Microsoft, as a tech company, of course, we also have product managers that are more on the technical side and the engineering side. And yeah, so to introduce a bit, I put it a bit in bullet points because my job isn't the standard job. So within Microsoft, there are, of course, product groups where we have designers, but I'm actually working in a consulting side. So where we customize technology for our customers. And so my team mainly focuses on the emerging technologies. So think about conversational AI, digital twins, mixed reality, which now, of course, also always connected to the metaverse, and also creating apps that are a little bit more complicated than normal. My team is global, which means that my manager is in the US, to say it very, very practical. And I have 50 teammates, about 50 teammates, but that also changes, of course, all over the world. And the fun thing is that not only my team is international, but also my customers are very international. So I work across countries on project basis, which ranges from doing projects in Europe, Americas, Middle East, Africa. So it's very interesting to work in these different countries, but also cultures. And I also learned a lot through that about designing for different cultures, and also aesthetically what's experienced as good design, right? And what people find nice and look aesthetically. And so also then, besides all that, I also work across industries. So that can range from retail to manufacturing to healthcare. So my job is all over the place, basically, but that also makes it a lot of fun, and makes it really fast paced. So I really like that. And this is me with the HoloLens. I had to put that in because it's one of the technologies. If you haven't tried it out, it's definitely a really cool product to once try it out, because it's basically, yeah, these 3D experiences as if you're in a sci-fi movie, and it actually works. And then besides Microsoft, I also started the Design Strategy podcast a few years ago. And this is actually because, at Microsoft, I was doing work in the UX space, but I noticed that people often confuse user experience with user interface design, or with service design, or with strategic design. So then I thought, okay, I want to start talking to people in the field to understand how they position themselves, how they position their career, what is it that they do, how is their job different from mine at Microsoft, just to share insights and discuss learning. So it's a very casual, low-key podcast, but it's really a fun project on the side just for me personally. And also to talk a bit about Yen's comment about what is then a design strategist. So basically, for me, I think design strategy is a super broad definition, but how I like to define it is that basically, as a design strategist, we start with defining a problem or looking for the right problem and making sure we are solving the right problem, and basically getting it from a sort of vague idea or an intuition into something tangible, as in a proof of concept or a prototype. And so at my university in Delft, we always used to call this the fuzzy front end. So basically, it's the spaghetti that starts super wrinkled and then, tangly. And then at a certain point, we can sort of even it out. And we can go from super fuzzy to something concrete and tangible, which then empowers people in other roles, mainly engineers, right? And specialists, to understand how we then continue with product and service design. But so that's just my personal definition. But through the podcast, I discovered there are a lot of definitions. So mine isn't per se right or wrong in that sense. And so, yeah, today we'll be talking about inclusive design, right? And so I would love to have this, of course, as an interactive experience. So I immediately wanted to start with a question to get a bit of an understanding of what are your expectations for today. Have people already heard from inclusive design, or is it something completely new? Are there specific things you would like to learn, or questions you would like to get answered?
Raise your hand, your physical hand, and then you can speak. Min.
Oh, no, I was demonstrating.
Oh, sorry, that was the demonstrator.
What about you, Yunyan?
Okay. Well, I can actually, it's not a question, Josephine, because I know what the talk will be about. You will make us reframe our thinking. And perhaps I can ask you, when you do that, can you warn us?
I will.
Okay, so I see some comments. It's completely new, so I think you have all the space to start where you want from.
Colin has a hand up.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
Colin, please go.
I thought I'd give a quick question. Design, this is the design thinking community, this idea of inclusive design. Typically, it's design thinking, human-centered design is supposed to be inclusive.
Yeah.
Almost an assumption that there is an inclusivity and all the stakeholders involved. And so I'm curious to know how this word inclusive design differentiates with what most people, I guess, would associate design thinking or human-centered design with.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Like, design is in its definition, like human-centered design and design thinking is in its definition about inclusion and also about making good designs. And I think at a certain point, I'll also get there to explain a bit how it is very much intertangled. But I think there's not really a difference. I wanted to say, I think there's not difference. The only thing I can say is that I think this definition emerged because there wasn't enough emphasis or awareness of it. But I 100% agree with you that inclusion should be or is by default part from design. But why the term or how it's different or why it came, my gut feeling is that it came because there wasn't enough emphasis within the industry or maybe outside of the industry, so non-designers, and that this term emerged from there. That answers it a bit. Yeah.
Cool.
I see
Thank
Peter. You. Yeah, you're welcome. And Peter as well.
I'm on a war with Microsoft because they have a very bad product and they brainwashed people to believe that's a good product. It's the flight simulator.
Oh, okay? Yeah.
They don't have airplanes. They don't have airplanes. Flying is about the airplanes. They have 20,000 airports and they don't have airplanes. I can't simulate a flight New York, London, because it's made with the A330. They don't have A330s. They don't have the airplanes. They never got the point. A guy likes to do something on the simulator that you can't do in real life. I can fly small airplanes, easy, but none of us can go on a airliner and fly. They never understood. They don't make themselves available, and they brainwashed those YouTube people to say that's a good product. It's not. There's no airplanes.
Thank you.
There's no airplanes.
But Peter, you won an award with Flight Simulator for.
Huh?
You wanted. Oh, sorry.
I wanted them to put the airplanes, options for airplanes, and customize. If I could buy it, I want to buy with those airplanes. They don't give us the option to choose the airplanes. You see, they put you a package like one size fits all.
Thank you,
good customer service. We could customize, and that's what you do. You work with the people. I just want to buy with those 10 or 15 airplanes. I don't like the other ones. Okay. But they put you a package and put a lot of junk with things that you don't want it. You see.
Thank you, Peter. You did make us laugh. Yes, thank you. Josephine, back to you, please. Back to you.
Sorry, is it me or I'm hearing like another noise, or is that just me? I think now. Oh, now it's gone. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I think
hello. Here is Danny. I would like to
Oh, Danny, sorry, I cannot hear you. It's breaking.
You're really choppy.
I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, it's like it's breaking up and sounds roboty. Otherwise, feel free to put it in the chat, and then I can.
Yes, I'm good.
Yeah. Sometimes technology.
Please continue, Josephine. Yes.
Okay. So let me get to your question, Danny, in a minute, and I'll just continue for now. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about inclusive design Yeah, thank you. I wanted to talk about inclusive design. And so, okay, it's interesting to hear, right? I think also back to Colin's question about inclusion and design. I think what's also been a term around there that was often linked to inclusive design is accessible design, which is basically a design approach which is outcome-based and focuses on designing usable products specifically for people with a disability. And so I always want to start or introduce this topic with explaining that accessible design is something very different from inclusive design, because inclusive design is the opposite, because it's a design approach which is process-based instead of outcome-based. So it's almost more of a mindset, and it focuses on designing usable products for everyone. So instead of saying, okay, we have a product and today people with a disability cannot use it, so we're going to create a separate product. Actually, inclusive design is saying, you know what, why aren't you looking more closely to your existing product and why it's not usable? And why aren't you changing that instead of designing something separate? And so that's the first thing I want to emphasize with the difference between accessible design and inclusive design. And then an example of that, and I also want to say accessible design isn't wrong, right? But it's just to emphasize the difference in sort of the angle where it's coming from. So an example of accessible design is the Dutch railway company. And so they had these signs on the station, basically on the tracks, where you could read, okay, in 5 minutes, this train is arriving on this track. But the thing was that for people who are visually impaired, they couldn't always see the signs because the signs are hanging from a distance. And so what they did is that they created an additional app basically to that copies or displays that same information that is on those displays, to make sure that people who are visually impaired can either read it from more up close or can use their speech, right? So text to speech reader basically to hear it if you're, for example, fully blind. And so this is an example of accessible design because it's a separate solution, because in that way you could have also said, okay, why aren't the signs redesigned and why are they hanging this high? Why are they even signs? Isn't there another way to display information? And so that's a bit the difference with inclusive design, is that instead of designing something separate, inclusive design is saying, okay, start looking at the core product and make sure that your core product is usable for everybody instead of creating a separate solution. And so I'm not saying one is right and the other is wrong, but it's just to, again, emphasize the difference. And so with that, what's interesting is that inclusion is really an engine for innovation. So some of the greatest inventions of our time came from people, driven to overcome exclusion. And there are some nice examples of this that are actually very personal. So in the left top, you can see the inventor of the telephone. And so he actually created that for his wife who had a hard of hearing. And so basically, because she was hard of hearing, she had trouble with diffusing noise and distinguishing different noises. And so he made something that has led to the telephone today, to basically focus a noise signal to make sure that she could hear what he was saying. The same is for the typewriter, and on the right top, and the invention of email, invented by the man in the left bottom. Both of them wanted to communicate with people who were hard of hearing again, and so they basically started writing letters and typing, right, in order to make communication more easy. And then a joystick, of course, also is an interesting one, because when we went to space, we realized a driving wheel doesn't really work with the suits that were coming to space. So from there, they decided to create a joystick, which again led to a lot of other innovations, and it was used in a lot of other different areas, not only by people who have hard of hearing or people who are physically impaired, but it's used by everybody. And so that's the interesting thing about how inclusion can be an engine for innovation. And so there are a lot of companies, as I said, that are looking into this and that are really excited about emphasizing this more and looking more into this. And I have to say that's, of course, because of the impact it has, right? But also because there are more and more regulations that are focusing on accessibility, right? So you have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there's the European Accessibility Act. So a lot of organizations are also being forced to take measures and have more focus on this topic. And so Adobe is one of those companies that has created a inclusive design resource, basically. So definitely check that out, because I wanted to highlight that. And from if I remember it correctly, this mostly focuses on the visual side of it. But then what's also always a fun one, I find personally, is this one created by IDEAN and Cards for Humanity. So they basically created this online card deck, and you could click on the middle button, and then basically you can deal pairs of cards that can help you sort of review your product or review your initial ideas. So for example, in this case, there's a card, Aston Wall is 20, is very caring, and is deaf. And so there are different sort of emotions and personality traits that they've paired with mismatches in order to see, okay, how can you make sure that you think about everything and prevent your personal bias that we all have. And I'll also address that in a minute. But so these are examples of how inclusive design is more and more a topic that's being looked into. And so with Microsoft, we've also created a methodology, which is fully open source. So you can access it at microsoft.com/design/inclusive, or just search for Microsoft Inclusive Design, and then you get to the website. And so what I will present today, everything is accessible and downloadable, and again, inclusive, so everybody can use it. And that is, of course, because we also want to empower everybody and make sure that everybody pays attention to this, focuses on this, and so so we get more inclusive designs and better designs in the end. So that is the methodology I'll be talking about. I also see some comments popping in. Yunyen, Mim, please interrupt me if there are any questions coming in, or also feel free if people want to come off mute. I'm totally fine with that. So yeah, starting with Microsoft, it always maybe sounds a bit cheesy to start with the CEO of a company, but what's actually quite powerful about this is that our CEO, Satya Nadella, I joined the company when Satya was already CEO. He actually really walks, or how do you say that, like walks the walk or walks the talk. I'm Dutch, so my English sometimes in sayings aren't always perfect. But basically, he's really about practice what you preach. And that is because he has a personal story about inclusion, because his son, who unfortunately passed away last year or a few months ago, was physically handicapped, physically limited. So that was, and also he has 2 kids, of which some of them have trouble with learning, like every kid, right? I mean, how many children are there not in the world that have trouble with learning or challenges with learning? And so for him, inclusion and accessibility has always been a priority from day one when he became CEO. And that's also why he got to this mission that we have with the company, to empower every person and every organization in the world to achieve more. And when we say that, we really mean everybody. And that's also where, again, this inclusion and this emphasis on accessibility and inclusion is coming from. And what I, as a designer, also found really interesting about that is that if we say that we want to empower every person and every organization in the world, and we're saying we're basically creating products and services for everybody, we should not only look at who we are designing for, but we should also reflect that in our own organization. So basically, we also try to make sure that we have inclusive teams that value diverse perspectives and basically follow these design principles, so we have the deepest impact on building products that are designed for everybody. Because how can you design products for everybody if you don't represent everybody within your company, right? And that's, I think, a super interesting perspective. And I can say from the company that I have a lot of colleagues that are very different. For example, I have a colleague who's a programmer who is fully blind. And whenever I say this to my friend, people go like, oh, but I didn't know people could be developers when you're fully blind. I mean, that says enough about the biases and the unconscious biases we all have, right? And I think that's why it's so important to make sure that we reflect diversity in those organizations, so we can also make sure that we build diverse products. And that's, of course, also where my passion comes from. Oh yeah, I see a hand. Sorry.
when you were explaining that you also have colleagues who are fully blind and
Yeah.
are a programmer, let us check with our audience who also has, let me say, special co-workers who were attracted in the same way. So I wonder with you in the audience who also has colleagues who are special. Not no, I see Donna shaking her head.
Oh,
Yeah,
I can talk.
yeah, you have one.
I
Yeah,
do. I used to work part-time retail in central London, and one of my colleagues is hearing impaired, and I remember the company had physically an interpreter with him all the time, and it was really powerful for me to see that the inclusivity of that moment for me.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah, very empowering, right? Because I think it's also important for me. I mean, it's important to have those examples, right? Also for people to look up to and to represent it. And I think that's also very empowering. And again, as I said, I cannot emphasize it enough. How can we build products, right, for everybody that are usable by everybody if we don't represent it and have that diversity within the product teams that create those products? Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Good. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Josephine, I work in aviation, work on an airport, and I see a big discrimination with older people. The millennials, they get mad. You're supposed to know everything. They don't put themselves in the place of someone that's 65, 70, that didn't grow up with computers. And they don't adapt to the products for this kind of, it looks like discrimination against older people. It's okay. It's the only discrimination. They don't care. They don't design. They don't invite them for anything. I talk to the people that do the research, and they don't invite people over 60 to do anything. You see, they go over on the younger people, and it's hard for people use technologies. They use the phone. They have problems.
Yeah.
So it's just the inclusion of the older people.
Yeah. Definitely, it's actually interesting because I did I also present this topic to students, just again to spread the word. And in one of the workshops I did with them around this topic, I asked them to extend the toolkit because, for example, Microsoft's toolkit today only focuses on inclusion in a sense of accessibility. But so what's interesting is that I asked the students to expand the toolkit, and they came up, actually one team came up with a toolkit to look at inclusion of age. Because of technology, so many more and more people are being left out, right? And are being excluded unconsciously or consciously, and so they basically extended the toolkit. I don't have it today with me, but I need to see if I can find more information or find back the information of what they had exactly designed. But it's definitely something that is related to the topic, to this topic. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the time, so I just wanted to say, for me, this topic of accessibility and inclusion started quite early when I was studying in my bachelor's. I did a minor at computer science and electrical engineering in robotics, and we created a guide robot to basically guide visually impaired people, because there's such a shortage for guiding dogs. And so basically we thought, okay, what if we can create a robot that basically guides people? And that's actually what also was my initial trigger to work for Microsoft, because they have created a product as well that does this, but then with sounds. And so there were a lot of initiatives around this with accessibility and inclusion. And that's a bit my personal story as well of why I'm now today working at Microsoft and why I'm passionate about this topic. And so again, as I said, if we want to empower every person on the planet and every organization, well, there are 7.4 billion people in the world. So if we want to create products that are physically, cognitively, and emotionally appropriate for each of them, right, we need to do that through inclusive design. And so the methodology is a design methodology that enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. And so I'll get to the details in a little bit, but basically this is a nice way of saying that we try to change our mindset. So we make sure that we think about all the different scenarios of how people can use a product in order to make sure that it is inclusive. And so what's related to this is, of course, the word disability, right? And so we don't like the word disability to think about that as a personal health condition. So instead, what we like to say is that a disability should be thought of as a mismatched human interaction. So basically meaning that if you've designed a product and someone, as we say, with a disability cannot use it, it's not then the fault of that person because they have a disability. It's your product that wasn't well designed, right? And that's a bit of a different perspective, and it's a bit of a challenging perspective. But I think it's fair personally to say it like that, because I think we can always improve our designs and basically make sure that we prevent those mismatches. And so that's what this toolkit also looks into, is that we say, okay, disability happens at the points of interaction, right, between a person and society. And this can be physical, cognitive, but also social exclusion, right, as Peter explained just now, because of age. And so all of this is basically the result of mismatched interactions, as we call them. And so as designers, I always find as well that it's our responsibility to know how our designs can affect these interactions, because our role is quite early on in the product development and product design process. So we have quite sometimes a big voice in making sure that that a product is inclusive, and we can also still filter out things that can create mismatches, so we can really have an impact there. And so one of the examples that I wanted to raise is closed captioning. So I was curious, are there any people who use closed captioning today? And if yes, for what? Yes, I see Donna and I see Nora. Hands up, go. Yeah. Donna, I see you're off mute. Do you want to share for what you use it?
I bother people around me because I use it in case I can't understand what somebody's saying. So at least I can read it.
Yeah, I do that as well. Yeah.
Jimena?
Yes, same as Donna. Even if I could be watching a movie or in English, I still even would put the captions in English.
Yeah. Same for me. So I actually watch almost all movies with closed captions. It's also just because then I'm certain that I don't miss anything. And sometimes I'm also watching a bit with one eye, or how do you say that? I'm not like fully focused watching. So then I think closed captions is also nice because it allows you to follow it a bit more easy. But so it's interesting to hear that there are more people that use closed captioning, even though you may not use it per se because you have an impairment of seeing, right? And so, or impairment of hearing, sorry. And so that's what I wanted to emphasize as well, is that with this toolkit, we want to show that more people can benefit from closed captioning, for example, taking closed captioning as an example. So closed captioning was initially designed for people who have hard of hearing, right? To follow sort of all the little sounds that are happening. So not only the subtitles, but also if there's a certain music, what type of music is it, right? So it's more descriptive than regular subtitles. But then reading in an airport, or for example, if you're in a silent area of a building or of a train, for example, if I'm in a train and I'm on social media, sometimes I see movies. If they have closed captioning, I can follow the movie almost completely. Same for teaching a child to read, right? So, or learning a new language. So watching Casa del Papel with Spanish subtitles because I wanted to learn Spanish. Those kind of things are all use cases of why you can use closed captioning. And so what we do with the toolkit is that we basically say, okay, instead of having personas that we design for, we say we have a persona spectrum. And so we say, if we look at these mismatches that we were talking about, there are not only permanent mismatches, so hard of hearing, but you also have situational mismatches because you're in a specific situation, for example, at an airport where there's a television without volume or without a speaker, or you're in a silence area and you cannot turn on your noise. So those are situational mismatches. or then temporary mismatches where it will take some time for you to overcome that mismatch. So for example, because you're learning something, right? And so the interesting thing is that because of this spectrum, we can basically make sure that we think about, or we look at our products, ideas and service ideas from different angles. And we can make sure that we design as inclusive as possible, right? I think it's always, personally, I think it's always difficult to say, okay, a product is 100% inclusive, because I think there's always areas to improve, and there's probably always things that will be mismatches. But as long as you can already inspect it from the start, right? And make sure that you cover or prevent as many mismatches as possible, that's in the end the goal. And so with that, the methodology consists of 3 principles, basically. As the first one being recognizing exclusion, the second one learning from diversity, and the third solving for one, extend to many. And I'll go into each of those. But then the first one is recognize exclusion. So the interesting thing is that exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases, right? And we all have biases. It can be conscious, unconscious. And so the important thing is that you recognize exclusion. So who are we designing for, and who gets excluded? And often that who gets excluded, that's something that we may overlook. And so I'm also curious to hear, are there any people who maybe had experience with being excluded and are willing to share that, or want to share that? And this can also be unconscious, right? So was there ever that you experienced a mismatch and you thought, it's also a very personal question, so I also understand. But I thought I can give it a go.
I have a mismatch because I have really big feet. And if I want a pair of shoes, it's really hard for me to find one.
Yeah.
Because that's constantly for even for a woman, you know, I have a shoes in my size.
Yeah. I actually have a friend who also has that. Yeah, because the regular shoe stores don't have it, right? So you're excluded in that sense. And I think that's a good example of how sometimes it's not on purpose, right? But it happens. And so I think that's also what we want to. Thank you for sharing, by the way. But that's also, oh, Mimp, yeah, I see your hand. Are you Indian? Oh, sorry. Okay. Or
I'm Union's mic, so our audio doesn't flash. So I don't know if any of you know Fenty Beauty, Rihanna's makeup line, and they're very known for doing. It's not a self-promotion, by the way. That she's known for doing different shades of color foundation, and I didn't know that was a struggle until I spoke to a few of my friends who are Black, and I lived with them too. And they said, oh, I have to mix foundations all the time and I never find my shade, but more companies are doing that now. So I also find that really, really, I guess, it took a while for that inclusivity to happen, but I never thought of that as a faulty thing because I didn't experience that. So it was nice to hear from them that is their experience, and now that is fulfilled.
yeah. No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think that's also a really good example. And that's also showing again that inclusion, of course, is also getting more and more awareness because there are more brands, right? Or more companies that are coming from this point of view, but that are actually a huge success because all of a sudden there's a broader use case than just the mismatches, right? Or exclusion that they started with. And so then so who are we designing for and who gets excluded, right? That's the first principle, recognizing exclusion. The second, and I wanted to say points of exclusion help us generate new ideas. And that's exactly, Mimp, also your example, right? So there are new business ideas and new innovation ideas coming from these opportunities, which is actually, I almost sometimes call it like it's almost a design strategy on its own, right? Because it allows you to create innovation and innovate in ways that are out of the box completely. And so the second principle, learning from diversity, is about human beings being the real experts, right? So I said we all have our biases, and so therefore we are the only ones who know specifically for our personal situation what happens. And so once we start sharing our insights and our perspectives, we can learn from each other, and that's when you can really sort of get into inclusion and inclusive design. And so therefore we want to make sure, if you include a range of people also in the design process, you can make sure that your products also become inclusive, as I also said at the start. And then the third one is solve for one, extend to many. So this goes a bit back to the spectrum, because what we say here is that by focusing on what's universally important to all humans, so we focus on one specific scenario. So basically, let's say you focus on a permanent mismatch, but basically by focusing on a permanent mismatch, you can make sure that your idea or for your product idea and your service idea is also inclusive for people who encounter situational and temporary mismatches, which in the end makes it a higher quality sort of product and better user experience in the end. And so that feels a bit counterintuitive, because we're used to accessible design, to creating separate solutions next to our existing product or service. But with basically solving for one, extend to many, we can design for a specific person with very distinct needs, and we can basically from there extend it and inspire new product ideas, and also make sure that we think about and ideate almost about all the scenarios and biases that we may have. And so an example I want to give is that, for example, we had a project, right, where we created a solution, a product for engineers that were fixing windmills. And so the interesting thing is that here we did a full design process, or followed a full design process with research and product design. We did the interviews, we did observations, they told us about their job, but we didn't have the permits to for example, go on site. And so in the end, the app was tested, the employees could use it, so it went live, they launched it. And then once they started using it in the field, in these harnesses on the windmills, they were wearing gloves. And then we thought, oh, okay, then something with a touch screen, so for example, an app doesn't work, right? And so there actually, we also had that realization of, if we would have used inclusive design and the persona spectrum methodology, and we would have looked at a spectrum of holding or touching, we would have thought about this situational mismatch where people can wear gloves. I mean, it also happens in the Netherlands where I live. We bike all too often. I mean, biking and WhatsApping isn't a good idea, but sometimes stuff happens. Or if you're standing outside and you're wearing gloves, right? Because it's cold, I cannot use my touchscreen. And so those are things that, as a designer, if you cannot do research on site in the context, those are things that you can overlook, right? And I mean, ideally you do in context research, but sometimes this is not allowed, or because of certain limitations or restrictions. And so in that case, the methodology actually allows you to also create better designs. Yeah, and not only by looking at per se accessibility, but just in general. And so then about the toolkit, because the toolkit is actually openly available, as I said. And so it consists of a few cards. And I also use some design thinking methods to create it. I see Yen, your hand is up. Yeah.
Yes, there are two questions on a higher level, but I do want you to show the toolkit first and then tackle those two questions on a higher level. Yes.
Yeah, I will do that. So yes. So the toolkit is openly available. If you just search for Microsoft Inclusive Design, you will find it. It basically brings you to this website, right, where we have all the cards and the guides to explain how the toolkit works. And so the toolkit itself follows a conventional design thinking process. So think about the double diamond, so diverging, converging, right? And so we have these phases of getting oriented, framing, ideating, and then iterating and optimizing. And so I'm going through this a bit quickly because I'm assuming most people here are familiar with that process. But so basically, it's just a regular process of doing research, verifying assumptions, right? Capturing those details, defining what it is then that you're going to design, and then design it and test it again. So it's basically going through these iterations. And so besides those phases, when I was showing those phases, I thought, oh, maybe we can use some existing design thinking methods to combine it with. So this is some of my personal work where I, for example, grabbed an empathy map, which basically always has a persona in the middle, and then you can brainstorm about, okay, what does that persona say, think, do, or feel in a certain situation? But here in this case, instead of a persona, I put the spectrum in here to say, okay, if, for example, so these are the spectrums, right? So, for example, for touching, for seeing, for hearing, for speaking, you have a spectrum of permanent mismatches, temporary mismatches, and situational mismatches. And so if I, for example, take the one for seeing, I can say, okay, my activity is seeing. An example of a permanent mismatch is that I'm colorblind. A temporary mismatch is that I have an eye infection. And a situational mismatch is that the sun is shining in my eyes, or the sun is shining on my laptop screen, and so it's reflecting and I cannot see what's happening on my laptop screen. And so when then using an empathy map, you can start thinking about, okay, if I'm colorblind, what do I say? So probably I will say, okay, is that green or is that red, right? Is that blue or is that yellow? Or what does it say? Because sometimes you have red text on green backgrounds. That's not readable. If I have an eye infection, what do I think, right? Oh, it hurts. Oh, I'm so insecure because I see less than I normally do. What's the distance here? Because I can't see depth anymore. What do people do, right? And you do the same for doing and feeling, and it sort of allows you to empathize, as it's in the title, an empathy map. So it allows you to empathize and put yourself in the shoes of someone who's experiencing mismatches and getting familiar with the spectrum. And so again, this is not per se part of the toolkit, but it's just a personal thing I did to grab an existing design thinking methodology and combine it with the inclusive design sort of mindset. And then from there, you could say, okay, if we then think about this idea that we have, or this concept we have in mind, what is then the user journey? So what are the steps that we would like our users to go through ideally? And this also allows you to do this exercise for an existing product or service, right? So you could even do that. And with that, you can then below in those swimming lanes, in those horizontal swimming lanes, start listing, okay, what are the mismatches that we see in this journey? So for example, and there are actually cards for this again, so I'll just go through it. But as you can see, there are 4 categories. So physical context, social context, human plus environment, and human plus object. So for example, for a physical context, if we would use this product at home versus in a car, would it be used any different? And could there all of a sudden be mismatches? So for example, in a car, you could say, okay, I need my hands, so something needs to be hands-free, right? So I have a mismatch in not being able to hold things maybe, or maybe seeing also less because I cannot be distracted. The same for social, so alone versus being in a crowd. So with a crowd, there can be a lot of noise. With co-workers, I may not want to talk about personal information because not everybody can know everything for me, right? And so those are things that allow you a bit to ideate about, okay, what type of mismatches can there be? Same for human plus object and human plus environment. So think about the weather. Think about, is someone left-handed or right-handed, right? And so we wanted to do a quick exercise. But if, for example, if you're right-handed, try to write your name in the air while being left, or try to write it even on paper. Vice versa, if you're left-handed, try to do it right-handed. You can imagine that if you do that, there are very different ways of using a product, right? And so again, there's no right or wrong here, but it's just almost like a brainstorming exercise that allows you to think about different scenarios and look at your product idea and service idea from different angles. So this is then basically what it could look like, right? That you map some steps on a journey and you try to think about, okay, what are the different mismatches that we can see? Then take those mismatches, right? Rephrase them in how might we statements, which is again a regular design thinking tool, and ideate about potential solutions. So if someone cannot do something because they're experiencing a situational mismatch, how might we then make sure that we don't have that, right? How might we resolve for that? And try brainstorming about those ideas. And this basically allows you really as an ideation method to finally say, okay, if you have a lot of ideas, right? Unfortunately, we cannot always do all of them all together and start implementing them all together. So if you want to really sort of start implementing it, how do you then prioritize it? And you can, for example, just do that on a value versus impact, or sorry, value versus feasibility, or impact versus feasibility matrix, to sort of understand, okay, this is where we can plot the ideas, and this sort of allows us to prioritize it. Yes, and Yunyan, I see your hand up because of the questions, because this is the full toolkit, just to wrap it up. Yeah.
Exactly. And you can find the toolkit on the link that we are going to share.
Yeah.
The 2 questions. So I'm trying to get you all out of the concrete and very practical stuff and bring you to a more abstract level. So Dani had a question. What are the main challenges you have in this kind of design processes? That's one. And the other question is, when would sustainability and circulation come into the process?
That's interesting as well. Okay, so the first process from Dani, yeah. So I think that's a very good question, because there's definitely one of the challenges that I experience with this design methodology is that you want to include everybody, but the world is so big and there are so many different perspectives that you cannot include everybody, how do you say that, like at the same time. You cannot think of everybody at the same time. So you need to repeat this exercise multiple times, and that's actually good, because you remind me of something I forgot to say. Ideally, that spectrum, right, that we had at the start with the empathy map, we now did it for seeing, but ideally you repeat that for other activities. So for hearing, for holding, for touching. And so I think that's a bit the nice thing about the toolkit, is that it allows you to think about different perspectives, but that is also directly the challenge, because your brain can only think about so many times at once, right? Or so many things at once. So you need to repeat the exercise to make sure that you think about all the different perspectives, and still then it's never finished. It's just like design, right? Design is never finished, it's never 100% done. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, good. I see a thumbs up. And then the second question about sustainability, circularity. I think I'm a big fan of other toolkits from IDEO that were created with, and then I have to say, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation about circular design. I read, that's also all open source, by the way. So if you don't know it, definitely look it up, because I use it for workshops as well. I use that, and I'm thinking how to link it to inclusive design, because I'm interested where is this question coming, or where it's coming from, and what was the thinking behind it. Because to be honest, I don't have a clear, or how do you say that, like direct answer. So I'm curious to discuss it as well, because I find it a very interesting question to link it to sustainability. Yeah. Oh yeah, Ilona. Yes.
Yeah, it was from me. Sorry, I catch a cold today.
No worries.
Yeah, well, my thinking is behind, because Microsoft is one of this very biggest industry portion, and every year everything comes new out. And when you make an interface design, it is a question also how we clean up our world. We have so much rubbish around, and I believe inclusive can be also a question to the technology when you make this website. So my idea is, why you're not inclusive, making a design specific for people? They really have necessary tools, what they really need. So because when you have the market, you're in the shop, you have to buy this. Doesn't matter, you need it all. You need only a part of it. And of course, there are some specific small computers where you can choose, but specific for blind people or disabled people are in a wheelchair, they have a lot of problem with this sizes. So it is not very handy. And I believe this is a really important subject for the future. Why not to build computers where you can exchange part of it? It will keep the quality of long hauling and also the environment. That was my thought.
Super interesting. I think it also reminds me of a talk I had actually for my podcast with someone who he positions himself as a circular design strategist, Pablo Groclopo, and he basically always takes planet Earth as a persona and as a stakeholder, and then he creates stakeholder maps with planet Earth in there. So he basically, how do you say that? Like makes an analogy with planet Earth being a person, and then thinking about, okay, how would planet Earth feel, right? And what would planet Earth say in this situation? And your question and how you now explain it also reminds me of that, of sort of a creative take on how that could be linked. Yeah. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I thought, in a broad field,
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. It's 2 minutes to the top of the hour. Josephine, thank you very much for your story. It accessible design to inclusive design. We practiced yesterday. It takes a little bit of practicing before you can capture the whole mindset of inclusive design and really making most out of it for every single one of us. But thank you for showing us, and thank you for sharing the link with us. I want to ask Mim.
Hi. Sorry. Oh, no.
It's yes. It's yes.
Failing forward, everybody. So I would like to introduce our next month's guest speaker. In this session, we have innovation management, finding opportunities with Mark Mayhew, who is an industrial designer. In this session, you will be exploring innovation management, more particularly in the phase of identifying opportunities and mapping them for further development and engagement. Some topics that will be covered in the session are: what is innovation? The search for value, innovation ecosystem, innovation culture, mapping your vision, and the future of innovation. Join us. The registration link is right here. You can see register here. That is the bit.ly. Go for it. It will also be sent to your inboxes. And I hope to see you next month. And this is all of our crew members. Some of us are here, some of us are not. And we would like to invite you to stay with us in the backstage. So before we do that, I want us to do a goodbye to YouTube. We would like to wave goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.